I think I might start getting into it. Just sort of introducing what I aim to speak about tonight, how I'm going to be navigating, I suppose, the direction of the content, hopefully being able to provide some value for you guys. So to quickly introduce myself, I'm a buyer's agent with Purple Avenue. So my role essentially is to support, assist people in buying property. That's an end-to-end process. A lot of the time it can also be just a negotiation only service. It can be an auction bidding only service. But essentially I'm living and breathing the real estate market each and every day, which allows me to be able to get really good insights from real estate agents, from buyers, from vendors, to be on the ground and understand what is happening. Furthermore, I am based on the Northern Beaches, so it is my locality and where I spend the majority of my time in the market I spend most of my time in. So it allows me to be able to really understand the mechanics of what's happening. Now, anyone who watches any television at the moment, or if you are trying to buy a property, you will know that the Sydney market is running hot. Okay, now what does that mean? Well, essentially, it means that prices are escalating upwards. It means there's a lot of buyers in the market, and it means that there's a lot of competition for property. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover sort of 2021 so far, I suppose, and where we are at the moment, what that looks like, the current state of the market. I'll speak about that in terms of Sydney generally, as well as the Northern Beaches specifically. I'll touch on some analysis with some medians and some different growth rates using a few different suburbs in the Northern Beaches to be able to illustrate that. We'll talk about why those trends are occurring, which is really important to understand. We'll talk about what is impacting the market specifically in terms of demand and supply. What are the mechanics behind that that's pulling those strings and making these things happen? Ultimately, we are in a market that has immense stock shortages and an excessive amount of buyers. So understanding why that exists, I think helps to give a bit of context as to what we're seeing at the moment. I'm going to be giving some really helpful tips for anyone who's looking to buy. Now, some of these tips I do use in my day-to-day professional buying for people, so I really do hope they are of use to you. A lot of the stuff is standard in the sense of it's something that you'd normally do, but it's how you look at it, how you approach it with regard to the particular market at the moment. So let's talk about the start of 2021 and the property market and what that looks like. Now, like I stated before, it's hot, okay? We've got medians bursting through the roof. We've got an excessive, surplus amount of buyers in the market, but why is that? And I think a really good way to look at where we are now is to understand what happened towards the end of last year. Now, COVID-19 and the impacts that had on the property market can't really be understated. Looking at it from a demand perspective, buyer perspective, there was this time period during the lockdowns whereby anyone who was previously considering buying a property decided that they were going to wait. Okay, it was not necessarily everyone, but the majority of buyers decided at that point in time that they were going to wait. Now, that's down to a few different reasons. One, there was an immense amount of uncertainty in the market. Two, there was an immense amount of uncertainty around people's employment, which is entirely understandable. Three, there was no properties to buy because people weren't selling their properties during COVID for the exact same reason. There was uncertainty in the market. No one knew kind of where it was going to sit. So understanding what happened during COVID is really important to understand where we are now. Now, I will just premise a lot of what I talk about is the housing market as opposed to the unit market. I will make reference to the unit market at times. The reason I talk more so about the housing market is because in the Northern Beaches, it's the market that's predominantly driven by the owner-occupiers, and that's where a lot of this noise and a lot of the velocity in terms of the transactions is coming from. So looping back to speaking about what happened during COVID, consequently, when lockdowns eased, we had a whole lot of pent-up demand and a whole lot of buyers who had all of a sudden re-entered the market and they were ready to go at this point. They've been sitting there, they've been waiting, they've been seeing that during COVID, a couple of people had bought properties really, really cheap and they were ready to go, right? Combine that with low interest rates, so you have increased borrowing capacity for a whole lot of buyers, government incentives that help to introduce new buyers into the market, as well as, deliver certain types of I suppose, buyers or properties being purchased. And all of a sudden we had this buying pool that was significantly more than it was, 8 to 9 months ago. Now, this is all very well, but in terms of actually people listing their property and selling their property, well, those people are looking at what sold during COVID and they're going, well, the prices that were achieved weren't really too fantastic. It's not too red hot. So I have no reason to sell at this point. Okay. So that was initially what sort of, I believe, started the lack of stock in the market. Now there's a lot of reasons as to why that stayed the way it is at the moment, and we will touch on that. But I think it's important to understand how the period towards the end of last year came to be, because I think it really gave context to where we are at the moment. Now, I touched on properties that sold during COVID, not being a fair representation, I suppose, of natural market forces. And that really is so. So properties that sold during that period were not really able to be used as comparable sales going into October, November, December. And it's because it was an anomaly, I suppose, in the way that those properties were being purchased. The market was very unnatural. The pieces that were driving the market were very unnatural. So naturally, that results in properties being purchased for less than they otherwise would have been. So let's roll into where we are at the moment, okay? So the first thing to note, December was very abnormal. You talk to any real estate agent, ask them how their December was last year compared to years previous, and they will tell you that it was very busy, okay? They had buyers still wanting to engage. They had sellers who were looking to potentially move property off market, pre-market during that time period, because they knew there was qualified buyers out there who were still wanting to move. It was a very abnormal December in that regard. So we roll into 2021, and a lot of people have their cap on and go, okay, 2021, that's the year I'm going to buy. So immediately you have this new pool of buyers jump in, because a whole lot of people psychologically categorize the start of a new year as when they want to do something different, when they want to purchase a property. So a lot of people would have seen what was happening with the market, October, November, December, and they would have gone, no, you know what? I'm going to wait until the start of next year. Combine that with your other forces I spoke about, your low interest rates, your borrowing capacity, and everything else, and it just continues to fuel this fire for demand, right? And I want to really try and steer that towards the Northern Beaches market. But before I do, I just want to touch on, I suppose, what the medians are kind of looking like, and just speak a little bit about that, because price medians, it really depends on where you look for your source. I mean, if you look through, I think over the past 2 or 3 weeks, Domain and realestate.com.au have both corrected each other as to what the housing median is in Sydney. Okay, so how you quantify that data is going to determine what that looks like. However, it's safe to assume it's between 1.1 and 1.3 million for a house at the moment. All right, now narrowing that down to the Northern Beaches, I think firstly we need to understand why an area like the Northern Beaches is so desirable for people to buy a house. Okay, house being the key word. First of all, it's a scarce area. Okay, it's close to the water. It's isolated in the respect that it doesn't have a whole lot of public transport that travels out to other areas. It's very much an area that people see as highly communal, very family orientated, and people really like that. Okay, so that's one of the factors to why Northern Beaches is so appealing. Second of all, there's a lot of out of area buyers at the moment purchasing homes in the Northern Beaches. So people from the North Shore, people from the eastern suburbs. I think one of the big reasons for that is they can really see the value in the land size you can get on the beaches as opposed to those areas. Now, with the way medians are going, tracking on the beaches here, it could be understandable that it might move in that direction and level out, I suppose, to where that does sit. But as it is, there is a lot of out of area buyers coming into the market on the beaches at the moment as well, which is another reason why we've got so much demand. There's a really diverse pool of buyers, which I think is a very, very important thing to consider. So you've got families, okay? It's a very, very highly owner-occupied, family-driven region. At the same time, you've also got people who can see immense value in renovating or developing a block that might need a bit of work. And then next thing you know, they can really, really acquire some capital growth on that property by adding the value in. So you've got those type of buyers as well. You do have a lot of, I suppose, retirees who see the Northern Beaches as a really, really beautiful haven to retire in. There's another, element to the pool of buyers. And then you've just got the lifestyle chasers. All right, it's a beautiful place to live. It's scarce in that regard that it's so close to the water. It's not called God's country for no reason. Everybody loves it here, and that reason alone is a big reason why there's so many people who want to live on the beaches. The other one, and I think this is a fairly obvious point, is that a large portion of the population who lives here want to keep living here on the beaches. So that in itself, I suppose, creates not a drain in terms of the type of people who are living here. And if people sell properties on the beaches, they usually want to move and still live on the beaches because it is such a highly demanded location. The working from home movement, I think, has also contributed a lot to people being willing to live in an area like the Northern Beaches. Historically, one of the excuses as to why people wouldn't prefer to live in the Northern Beaches is because it was too far away from the CBD, or it's too far away from North Sydney, or wherever their office may be based. With what COVID really unraveled and allowed, I suppose, businesses to have confidence in staff working from home, people being comfortable and wanting to work from home, it really has opened up an area like the beaches as somewhere that's significantly more appealing, okay, for people who no longer need to travel to the city 5 days a week for their job. Now, on the other side of that, so we look at that and we can really understand from looking at house as the particular type of property, why an area like the Northern Beaches is so highly demanded, okay? Now, the key part of that demand is I want you to remember it's a highly owner-occupier demanded area. That means people want to buy houses here to live in. Yes, there's still high-performing investment properties and investment spots, but the majority of the market here is owner-occupiers buying houses to live in. The other side of that equation is equally as important to understand. Why is there not many sellers? Why is there not many stock? Because when you combine your high buyers and your low stock, that naturally creates that upward pressure on prices that we're seeing at the moment. So I did touch on one of them before, and that's that when people live here, they want to stay in the region generally. So if you're a seller and you're thinking about selling your house, and you're going to have to rebuy into a highly competitive, really hot market with a lot of other buyers that's unpredictable and doesn't have much stock to choose from, where's the incentive to sell your house? Okay, so yes, you could probably achieve a premium price at the moment, but at what cost? There's a big preference to renovate and improve as well. So people, I suppose, who are living in houses that could do with a bit of work, that deposit, they could ordinarily be looking to purchase another house. At the moment, they're seeing immense value, and I suppose it's a little bit trendy as well. Taking the initiative to be able to renovate the place they're in, improve the value, make it more livable, make it, increase the longevity of it for a growing family. Whatever angle you look at that, I think it's certainly something that exists, and there's a lot of benefits to it for a lot of people who do live around this area. There still is some uncertainty just hanging around COVID-19, and that's going to be there for a while. So long as that uncertainty is there, I think a lot of people are really just holding property because they don't really know what's going to happen. The vaccine is only just on the edge of being rolled out. There's still, semi-restrictions in place here and there. That alone, I think, is not quite giving a lot of people the confidence to take that step and sell their property. The predicted price growth that we're seeing a lot of in mainstream media is also, I believe, encouraging a lot of people to hold their properties because they believe that whatever that figure is, that it's going to be achieved over the next 12 months in terms of price growth, they're applying that to their own property. So a lot of people are sitting back and just waiting for that to happen, taking advantage of that potentially higher selling price in 12 months' time, and just sort of weathering the storm in the interim. And I believe that's another reason why there's not a whole lot of stock on the market at the moment. What there is, though, is a lot of off-market and stock being sold quietly. Now, I will move to more details on that in good time, but it is an important point just to note down and take note of for the time being. So look, what does this all mean? Okay, we've spoken about why there is so many buyers and why the market is so competitive. We've spoken about why there is low amounts of stock, not a lot of property available. But what does it mean? What's it telling us? So first of all, the obvious one that I've already spoken about is that you're going to get an incredibly rapid price growth. Okay, and we are seeing that all over the place. I will go through some numbers very shortly with some different suburbs and some specific numbers around them, which I think is fascinating, but largely speaking, price growth is significant. I want to take particular note of the price growth at entry-level houses, okay? And the reason I want that to be a point of importance is because that type of purchase is really, really emotionally driven because a lot of the time it's someone's first home, right? Families look at it and they see it as their first opportunity to own a home in an area like the Northern Beaches. And there's a lot of emotion that charges that. So you often find that entry-level price point for your respective suburbs moves really, really rapidly. Now, that entry-level price point at the moment, as a professional buyer, I usually sketch about 1.7 mil for a freestanding home as the sort of entry point on the beaches at the moment. It's not necessarily the minimum something's going to go for, but I would prepare a client with that being the minimum they would be needing to be prepared to spend to acquire a property in this region at the moment, freestanding, of course. Look, we're seeing properties sell sometimes 30% over the guided price. In defense of real estate agents, the guiding price can be difficult to, I suppose, project at the moment, and that's because they are using historical data. It's hard to sort of predict behavior in that respect. We're seeing record numbers of attendees at auctions and registrations at auctions. And if you speak to any agent or drive past an open home on a Saturday on a good day, you're going to see record numbers at the inspections. 70, 80 people going through. And this isn't even the first inspection. This is just second or third sometimes. There's a lot of people out there looking for property. Now, I'm going to move into some suburb examples, but just before I do, I just want to reiterate that a lot of the information I'm talking about is specific to houses. Now, the unit market is also increasing, but at a much slower rate. There is more stock coming on in terms of units. So if you look at now compared to 12 months ago, there's actually more units on the market now than there was. So we're not seeing that same real shortage in stock, but I'll comment on that shortly and why that is the case. So if you look at DY, for example, as one of the suburbs I'm going to touch on, DY has had an estimated 11% increase in the median price of houses in the past 12 months, 11%. Now keep in mind that when we hear a lot of these projections for Sydney on a macro level, and we're looking at high price growth, people are talking about 10%. So the fact that DY has risen by that much says how much that suburb is in demand. Interestingly, units, like I mentioned before, are actually, the amount of units listed have actually increased, okay? Now, you will find that is the case for all of the suburbs I'm about to mention. The reason for that is because units are held largely by investors, okay? Houses, freestanding houses here, usually owner-occupiers who live in them, not always the case, but usually a lot of units on the Northern Beaches are held by investors as an asset. Now, when an investor sees a hot market where people are paying a premium and they know they're holding an asset in a really highly demanded owner-occupier market, it's a great opportunity for them to sell that asset and achieve a premium price for it. So that is why you're seeing more units listed, but houses, it's not the case. Looking at Mona Vale, got an 8% increase over the past 12 months. So again, very, very high end. Same thing, obviously a massive decrease in houses, but an increase in units. Freshwater, we've got a 10.2% increase in 12 months. Very, very tightly held suburb, a great mixture of ready-made family homes and places that probably need a bit of work. But again, a really, really high growth suburb that again is experiencing a decrease in house and an increase in units. Now, Alambi Heights is a suburb that has seen absolutely, even in the scope of the Northern Beaches, incredible price growth over the past 12 months, 19.5%. 19.5% in the median. So we're talking about 1.4 to 1.8. Now that suburb, if I was to sort of categorize the last 3 to 4 weeks on the Northern Beaches, the most highly demanded. Now that's probably because where the price point sits for a really good family home ready to move into, it's a bit lower than kind of your higher end type of suburbs. It was giving people that would usually look at those suburbs all come together to go to a suburb like that for the type of property they're after. That's obviously created upward pressure on the price again, and here we are. So Alambi Heights, significant increase in the median price over the past 12 months. Now, I have had the luxury recently of speaking with Stephanie Baker, a sales executive at LJ Hooker in Coleroy. I'm sure many of you are familiar with. Now, I asked Steph for some thoughts on how she perceives the market at the moment. Obviously, the majority of what she looks after is in Coleroy, but her comments are as follows. So she said the market is absolutely thriving, so much so that some people have gone back to buying before they sell, which I think is a fascinating point. The reason for that, I believe, is because people want certainty. Okay, it's what we touched on earlier. People don't want to sell if they know what they're going to, so they're looking to buy first. But what does that mean? Well, it slows the market down again, doesn't it? Because if there's no stock out there for them to buy before they sell, then it's going to prolong the point in which they put their property on the market. Now, fascinatingly, Steph said that on-market properties are obviously a lot lower, but off-market properties are a lot higher. Okay, there's a lot more off-market properties at the moment. Now, I'm sure when Steph says that, she's not exclusively speaking about their agency, and I can comment and say that I've seen it in a lot of agencies around the beaches as well. The reason for that, I believe, is because people know that they have to pay a premium at the moment. You've got qualified buyers who are more willing and able to avoid having to compete in that open market. So they know what it takes to be able to secure a property. They're willing to pay a premium. They just don't want to have to go through the noise of competing with every other buyer. So there is a lot of off-market stock moving at the moment in that regard. The other obvious reason is that with so many people going through houses, I think a lot of vendors just don't want that on the weekends. They're not really comfortable with 60, 70 people going through their house. So if they have the opportunity to sell it off market, save on some marketing costs, and be able to reach some really strong qualified buyers, that's the route they are going to take. Now, Steph has also noted that the unit properties coming on has increased as well, which is obviously, again, investors looking to make the most of, I suppose, a really, really hot market. We have commented on that, so I won't go into it in too much detail, but I think coming from a real estate agent, it's a really interesting perspective as well. Now, I'm going to spend the rest of the time going into some real detail about some tips and strategies and stuff that you can utilize to hopefully help you purchasing a property. Look, the market at the moment, the first thing you need to acknowledge is that it is really hot. Okay, it's really hot. It's really fast moving. There's a lot of buyers, and you really do need to know what you're doing. You can't have one foot in. If you're going to buy a house, you need to be certain that you want to buy a house and how you want to go about it. Okay, so number one tip for me, or the first tip, sorry, for me, identify what you can compromise on and be very, very certain about that. Okay, if you're going out and looking at, let's say you look at 4 to 5 houses on a weekend, and just sort of throwing up, I like this about this, but I like this about this about this. I'm not sure what I really like more. You need to have certainty about what you do, what you don't like more, what's a deal breaker, what's a deal winner, and being able to be really certain about that from the front end, because that's going to provide the tools you need to be able to navigate your decision making. The second tip from me is comparable sales and what you utilize to determine a property's market value. Okay, so I know a lot of people, historically, a buyer or even a real estate agent would utilize sales from the past, say, 6 months. The reality is, in this market, you can't do that. Even 3 months at this stage in the majority of suburbs on the northern beaches is too long. You need to be looking at the past month, touch over a month, to see what kind of price point the property you're looking at has recently been bought for. That's the key part, bought for. When you're looking at properties, if you're new to the process and it's the first time you've gone on the portal and it's the first time you've started searching, I don't want you to look in the for sale tab. Go to the sold tab. Look at what's sold recently in the suburbs that you're looking at. That's going to tell you what people are actually paying. You'll find a lot of the time at the moment that agents aren't giving guide prices at the very start. And I can understand it, because it is hard to quantify what a property's worth. So what a lot of agents are doing instead is they're allowing that first open to be able to give them a kind of price point based on feedback. So if an agent doesn't have a guide price for you, when you go to an open, that's essentially what they're doing. They're using that first open to be able to gain feedback and everything else off the back of it. Now, I think, just generally speaking, any advantage that you can get at the moment is going to be significant for you. If that means an advantage in being able to inspect more properties, if it means an advantage in being able to, allocate time that you wouldn't usually to being able to talk to agents, look at properties, research properties, analyze properties, take advantage of that, because the amount of buyers in the market at the moment, you need every little inch you can get. Relationships with real estate agents are absolutely paramount in this market, and that's for a couple of different reasons. It doesn't mean you have to be friends with all of them. What it does mean is that you need to get yourself in a position whereby you can get access to property that others can't. Okay, if that's off-market or pre-market property, it's going to give you an advantage either way. Now, look, off-market property, it does have a few different definitions with different agencies. Okay, so sometimes off-market property will mean that it's advertised through social media. Sometimes off-market property will mean that it's sent out in an email to a lot of qualified buyers on their database. What it doesn't mean, off-market means it's never going to be on the portals, okay, realestate.com.au or Domain. So how off-market it is, I think, is important to look at. Some agencies will do off-markets whereby they don't give out the address until they know that you're a qualified buyer and they've had a conversation with you. Those are the types of properties that I would be trying to get access to, because they're going to have a significantly less amount of buyers going through it. An example, today, the agent might be watching, I went through a property the day they were taking a video for it, for the launch of the property in a couple of weeks. But I managed to get a look at that property for my buyer weeks in advance so that I could start analysing, preparing, identifying what it's worth, and putting a property acquisition strategy together well before it even goes to market. So you need to be getting yourself in that position to be getting an advantage and to be competitive. You got to really know what questions to ask the agent. Now, I mean, that's usually Googleable. You can jump on Google and ask, what do I ask a real estate agent? But make sure that the questions are actually going to be able to be circled back to your situation as a buyer, okay? Why the vendor is selling, how quickly do they need to sell? You know, what is important to them with the terms? You need to be able to identify exactly what's happening on the other side of the transaction so that you know how to have the strongest position you possibly can when you're leveraging during negotiation stages. All right, so before I even go to a property, if I was you as the buyer, I would be writing down a list of different questions and identifying what you're trying to work out. Don't just write the question, write why you want to work that out. It's going to help you get some clarity around the property before you go in, and it's going to help you to be able to secure and close if you do like the property. Now, you need to really do a significant amount of analysis before you even look at a property. All right. So say you're going to an open home on a Saturday. By the time you go to that property at the moment, you need to be able to identify what properties are sold around it, what other properties in the same sort of price bracket are selling, have spoken to the agent, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? The stuff that you'd usually do. The reason you need to do it so extensively and early at the moment is because speed is everything. All right? There's one piece of advice I could give, it's that speed is everything. So what I mean by that is I don't believe it's a market, even if a property is listed to go to auction, I don't believe it is a market at the moment where you can afford to go to an open home and then sit back for a week or two and think about whether or not you like the property. Because I can guarantee you there's going to be people making formal offers the night of that first open, okay? And people are buying property that quickly. So you need to be conducting as much of your due diligence and your research as you can before you inspect the property on that Wednesday, that Saturday, or whenever that may be. That's going to put you in a position to be able to make a decision immediately after the open home as to whether you want to pursue the property. That's going to put you in a position in a really short period of time to be able to approach the agent and get your formalities in that respect out of the way. So yeah, speed is absolutely everything. You can't be sitting back. You need to be ready to go. And that does tie into my next tip, which is have all of your professional resources, professional people, personnel, have all of them at your side throughout the entire process and have everything ready in terms of your finance. Notify your solicitor or conveyancer, get that contract reviewed. If there's a pest and build available on the property, make sure you get it as soon as you can. But please, please, please do not skip on the due diligence to be fast, all right? So yes, be fast, it's the most important thing, but never skip on the due diligence to be able to do so. So yeah, I have got a comment there from Nicole. Nicole, what I might do, I might just swing back at the end. So if anyone else has any questions, please do just drop them in the comments, and I'll do my best to be able to look back at the end and we can run through them all. But please do ask away, anything at all. Feel free to put it in, and we'll visit it really soon. So yeah, make sure that you have everything in order, all right? And also, not just in order, but make sure that you keep these people advised during the process. If you've got a mortgage broker, make sure you tell the mortgage broker, hey, I'm going to look at this property at this address. Is there any restrictions? You know, is my lending going to be impacted? The last thing you want to do is go unconditional on a property, and then you go back to your mortgage broker and they go, oh, no, sorry, that lender that you've got your pre-approval with, they don't like that kind of property, so we can't give you the money. And then you've got a conundrum, you have to try and move it around and everything else. So do keep your key people in the loop as to what you're doing and keep really open dialogue. And again, it allows you to be able to move faster, because if they're in the loop as to what's happening, then you're going to be able to make decisions a lot quicker as well. Know how to negotiate on terms as well as price. Okay, in a market like this, terms a lot of the time are winning out over price, okay? And I'm not saying that, $200,000 difference, they're going to go with someone who has better terms. Maybe not. But if it's very, very close and you know how to properly negotiate on terms, that's a lot of the time the difference between securing the property. There's a few different angles to go about as to how that looks, but I would just advise get yourself in a position where you know what terms are going to be, favourable, I suppose, to the vendor to give yourself the best position to be able to secure the property. All right. So look, I really think from what I've sort of gone through in terms of tips and I suppose what's typically important, I think those are sort of the key ones. If anyone does have any questions around that, how to approach that, what they can do to best prepare themselves to be in that position, please do drop it in the comments. But I will go over there now because it looks like Nicole has got a question. What are the best suburbs areas for first home buyers to get into at the moment? All right, so the first part of that question that you need to sort of work out is you're a first home buyer, but what do you want to buy? Do you want to buy a house? Do you want to buy a unit? What does that property look like? What's your, obviously what's your budget? Whereabouts does that sit? Work out what that piece looks like. In terms of suburbs or areas for first home buyers, I mean, my natural reaction is to go, well, you need to go to your entry-level suburbs, okay? So your DYs, your Chromas, places where you can get into that market at that sub $2 million mark for a freestanding house. So I suppose in response to that question, that's sort of the suburbs I'll be looking at. But yeah, Nicole, great question. Best thing you can do is to really work out exactly what you're looking for. So another question from Lizzie. Let me just have a look. House prices going up by. Yeah, it's a great question, Lizzie. There's a lot of commentary around where prices are going to go, quite honestly, and I'm always of the opinion that if you have the available funds to be able to purchase a house and you want to purchase a house, make the decision to purchase a house, okay? I like to advise and deal on what we do know and, objective information and facts, and I suppose what the situation is at the moment. Yes, it is difficult, but at least we know that X amount of money will be able to acquire X amount of house, and we're not working on, I suppose, predictables in a couple of years' time. So look, Lizzie, it really comes down to, I suppose, how badly you want to buy a house at the moment, what you're comfortable with. If house prices are obviously going to go up and that's the prediction, then, naturally, if you're inclined to believe that information, then you want to buy a house now. It's cut and dry. Liz, thank you for the question, Liz. When so many properties are being sold pre-auction, what's your best tip about how to put yourself in the best position? Fantastic question. So the first thing you need to know about buying pre-auction, if a property is part of an auction campaign, that means it is sold under auction conditions, all right? So that means when you exchange on that property, your cooling off is gone. So it's really, really important that you conduct all of your due diligence and get yourself in a position where you're 100% comfortable to make a decision to purchase that property prior to even getting into that negotiation stage, all right? Now, a lot of the time people will go, oh, but that's going to be an expense. That's going to cost me. I'm going to have to invest $1,000 in my solicitor and my piston build and everything else. Yes, that is 100% the reality of it. But to be competitive in this market, a lot of the time it's what you have to do. Now, in terms of actually getting yourself in the best position from a pricing and acquisition perspective, look, a lot of the time people don't want to sell pre-auction, okay? And that is what it is, all right? Different types of sales are obviously going to be able to attract, offers before auction and everything else. You need to have a good open relationship with the agent. The questions you need to be asking are, do they have an appetite to sell before auction? Is the vendor taking offers before auction? Those kind of questions, without directly asking what you're trying to do, is going to sort of unravel, I suppose, what the vendor's sentiment is in that particular situation. I think that you need to be very, I don't want to say generous, but you need to be realistic. You're going to have to realistically pay probably a premium as to what you're initially thinking to secure it pre-auction. You know, you've got to give them an incentive to want to move it beforehand. But at the same time, work out why they're going to auction and why they're selling. Because if there's a reason that you can leverage and they actually need that property to move quicker, let's say, for example, they've bought somewhere else and it's settling, that's going to give you an advantage in that situation. All right, so Liz, to conclude, get yourself in the best position possible to be able to make an offer on a property. Identify the vendor's situation so you know exactly what sort of leverage you have, and keep an open, transparent relationship with the agent, because if you can get them more on your side to help you facilitate what that number is to close that house early, that's going to benefit you in a big way. Thank you for the question, Claire. Would you recommend a house or unit as an investment on the Northern Beaches? Then if you were saying that units are not going up as much right now, long term, could I still do okay with a unit? Claire, that's a really good question. So the investment question is a really big one, and it's a big one because it comes down to a lot of different factors about what you're trying to achieve. With any investment property, that needs to form part of a long-term strategy, okay? Are you looking for capital growth? Are you looking for high yields? In terms of a capital growth play on a unit as an investment on the Northern Beaches, yes, it can be a very good investment. And the reason for that is because it's still a highly desirable area. There's still a lot of owner-occupiers that want to live here, which, as we know, is the number one contributor to capital growth increasing. But the key thing to know about purchasing a unit is you need to be careful what that security is, all right? A unit in one suburb on the beaches could be entirely different to a unit in the street over on the beaches, all right? So it's as much about where that unit's located, understand the strata setup, do your review on the strata report, understand the building, you know, and make sure that when you're purchasing, with an investment property, you need to be able to either acquire that for or under market value as well. So that's where the challenge is at the moment, obviously. But Claire, to answer your question, yes, there are some brilliant investment units on the Northern Beaches, and yes, you can acquire them. You just need to be considerate as to what your long-term strategy is and why you're purchasing the unit. Okay, Marie, how do people get into a house at all? We've got good incomes, good deposit, but the bank won't lend enough money. We're just that couple hundred short. I don't understand how people are getting into the market. Any tips on how they are doing it? How do people get into a house at all? Good incomes, deposit. Yeah, it goes back to what I said. It's about, I think, having an advantage in the market. This what you've explained, it usually should secure your property, right? But there's so many people like that at the moment. So, I mean, an obvious one, not trying to talk about myself, but a lot of the time people are using buyer's agents at the moment because it gives them a huge advantage, okay? You get access to more properties, you can inspect on their behalf, you know how to negotiate, know how to secure. And I think that kind of advantage and getting something quicker as well is going to help you, because your biggest enemy at the moment, and I'm not trying to play on FOMO because I don't think it's a positive point of demand, but it does exist. And as long as time continues to go on, there is a lot of risk, especially if you're at that entry-level price bracket, that you could get priced out. So time really is of the essence in that regard. But Marie, to answer your question, going back to sort of the tips I said, or utilizing a buyer's agent, which a lot of people are doing at the moment, having a lot of success, find an advantage to play on. Louisa Sangera, won't agents show people through houses anyway? What's the real advantage of someone using a buyer's agent and paying for one? What value do it add? Yeah, good question. So look, agents do show people through houses, most definitely. Open houses, obviously are available to the general public. Anyone can go through those. So as a buyer's agent, speaking about my role specifically and representing clients, I'll look at about 25 to 30 houses a week. Okay, that's from Monday to Friday, Saturday, sometimes Sunday. So you get more exposure to properties in that regard. And I think the important part about that is not necessarily qualifying properties, but it's disqualifying properties. All right. So instead of you going to 20 or 30 different properties and taking all that time to be able to identify what you like and what you don't, having someone be able to do that on your behalf with regard for exactly what you're looking for is going to be really, really helpful for you to disqualify those types of properties. Furthermore, if you're using a buyer's agent, Louisa, it's going to give you someone who has those relationships with the agents. So a lot of the time I'll, like today's example, gotten a word of a property whereby they were doing the video for their marketing campaign. We're allowed to go through early, and that's going to give us a huge advantage a couple of weeks before it even goes to market. So one of the tips I spoke about, having relationships with agents, is going to be a really, really significant advantage in this market. A lot of that stock, they go straight to buyers agents because they know they've got qualified buyers ready to go. And I guess the other obvious one is, a professional negotiator, professional house acquirer. You're in the market. I'm in the market and every single day. So knowing exactly what that looks like, knowing how to secure and acquire a house and living and breathing it, having someone on your side in a market like this, a lot of people are seeing a lot of value in it, and it's making the difference between them being able to secure something or not. Claire, no worries. Thank you for your question. Jenny, we're looking for a starter flat unit for our son. Happy to get something super basic. Where should we be looking? Jenny, that's a really good question. A lot of people are looking for that type of property at the moment, so it is naturally a bit of a competitive market. I think it's I'm not sure I'll be able to give you an exact suburb, because when you say starter unit, it really depends on what your budget is and what that looks like. For anyone who's watching, Jenny included, if you'd be interested in taking it offline, I'd be more than happy to have a conversation with you about what that could look like. But to answer your question, Jenny, I think work out what your budget's going to look like, and then identify what that flat or unit needs to look like, where he needs to be and everything else. Super basic, entry level. There's units in every suburb that would probably accommodate that. So yeah, it just sort of comes down to exactly what your brief looks like. But the good part is that they're definitely out there, definitely out there. All right. Was there any more questions or anything that I'll be able to accommodate? So like I mentioned, if anyone does want to take it offline, then by all means do reach out. I'd be happy to have a confidential discussion with you about your situation, what you're looking to do and everything else. You can find obviously me on Facebook. I'm tagged in the post, but it's Marcus Feasey BA, purpleavenue.com.au. Details are on there. I will quickly hold this up as well. So if anyone wants to note those details down, please do so. Hold it there for a bit. Fantastic. I am based on the Northern Beaches as well. So yeah, in the market every single day. Hope we can provide some value to you. Great. So if there's no more questions, I'd just like to say thank you to everyone for giving up a part of your Wednesday night to come and listen to all things property on the Northern Beaches. I hope it's been of some value to you. Look, it is a really hot market out there at the moment. It is a challenge. It is unprecedented, as much as I don't want to use that word because it's probably been overused over the past 12 months. But there is a way. There is definitely a way. People are securing property. People do know how to be able to do that, and you can do that too. If you have the right strategy and go the right way about it. So I've just seen another comment. Oh, looks like it's responding to someone else. Sorry. Yeah, it's a good point from Good point from Rebecca as well about having a good mortgage broker. Brilliant point, actually. Find a good mortgage broker who knows the maximum of your borrowing capacity and how to really, really leverage your income, and find a broker who's really going to service you well and look after you, because that can make a big difference as well in being able to get yourself in a position to acquire the property you want to. Thank you, Lauren, for coming. Thank you, Angela. Perfect. My details are there. Marcus@purpleavenue.com.au. Really appreciate you all being here tonight. Have a wonderful night.